Life always seemed so calm, as if everything was moving along its usual course. You never realize how fragile that sense of normalcy is until it completely shatters. It's strange how the simplest moments can turn into utter chaos. That evening started like any other, mundane and uneventful. I had just stepped through the door, sweaty and exhausted from the gym, hoping that the physical fatigue would drown out the chaos in my mind. I had no idea that no amount of heavy weights could prepare me for what I was about to face. She was in the kitchen, holding a glass of wine, as if it were just another ordinary Wednesday. The scent of her favorite expensive lavender candles filled the air. But something was off. Her smile seemed too bright, as if she was in on some secret joke that I wasn't part of. There was an unnatural quality to it. I could have asked her right then what was going on. Maybe I should have, but instead I grabbed a beer, leaned against the counter, and casually asked, as I always did, how her day had been. Everything was routine, until it wasn't. She barely looked up, engrossed in her phone, giving me only a lazy nod. Usually we exchanged a few words about our day, but that night, silence. I was ready to let it go, to ignore the slight unease that had started to creep in. But then I caught a glimpse of her phone screen. One name stood out: Mason. Not just any Mason, that Mason. A colleague she'd mentioned a few times over the past few months, always with glowing praise, always so enthusiastic, with brilliant ideas. I hadn't thought much of it before. After all, it was just work, right? But now something felt wrong. So I asked, trying to keep my tone light, "What's up with Mason? You two seem to be talking a lot lately." Her reaction was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. A brief flinch. She quickly composed herself, but not quickly enough for me to miss it. "Oh, nothing," she said, too casually and too quickly. She didn't meet my gaze, and the knot in my stomach tightened. I wanted to believe her. I honestly did. But something about her tone seemed too detached, too rehearsed, like she'd prepared this answer in advance. I acted like everything was fine. I nodded, shrugged, as if I accepted her explanation. But in my head, pieces started to fall into place, pieces I hadn't even known existed. When she said she was tired and went to bed early, I stayed up, pretending to watch TV. But my thoughts were elsewhere. I did something I'm not proud of. I took her phone. Yes, I know how that sounds, but sometimes you can't ignore your instincts, no matter how hard you try. What I found wasn't just innocent work chatter, it was much worse. Emotional betrayal revealed itself in their messages, filled with phrases like, "I can't wait to see you again." They had plans for Friday night, the same Friday when she said she'd be working late. It felt like my world had flipped upside down, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to sit back and be played for a fool. If she wanted to deceive me, fine. But I was going to turn the game on both her and Mason. As the night dragged on, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, their words blazed in my mind like neon signs. "I miss you. Last night was incredible. I can't wait for Friday." I'm not one to wallow in self-pity. No, I had a plan, and when I was done, neither she nor Mason would know what hit them. I am someone who is always several steps ahead, carefully planning every move so that I don't miss a single detail. If she thought she could deceive me, she was in for a harsh reality. I set a deadline for Friday. I had 3 days to devise a plan that would turn her betrayal against her with a resounding impact. Believe me, I was the one about to set everything in motion. First, I needed to figure out whether this was just an emotional betrayal or if it had escalated into something more. The next day, I called in sick at work. I didn't even tell her. Let her think it was just another ordinary day. As soon as she left for work, I got down to business. I wasn't naive. She had no idea I could check our shared iCloud account, where all the photos, messages, and conversations were stored. The thing about betrayal is that people become careless. They grow overconfident. They start to think they're untouchable, that you're too blind or too stupid to notice what's happening right under your nose. She was no exception. Within minutes, I had everything. Photos, call logs, locations, all the dirty secrets she thought were hidden. They had been seeing each other for 5 months, and she had the audacity to sit across from me at dinner every night, talking about her day as if everything was fine. But it wasn't the photos or the messages about meeting in seedy hotels that hurt the most. No, what shocked me more was how she laughed at me. He doesn't suspect a thing. Told him I had to work late again. Poor guy. Poor guy. Is that who I was to her? Just some naive fool she could string along while basking in another man's arms? My blood boiled. I wanted to storm into her office and destroy everything right then. But no, that would have been too easy, too quick. I didn't want a fast explosion. I wanted something slow, something more painful. So I reached out to Kyle, an old friend who now worked as a private investigator. We'd always been close, and he owed me a favor. It was the perfect time to call in that favor. I asked Kyle to follow her, track her every move for a few days, and document everything. She was predictable, a creature of habit. If she thought she could hide this affair, I wanted proof of every little detail. Kyle didn't ask too many questions, just agreed. I made sure he knew Friday was going to be the big day. That's when things would get interesting. While Kyle was handling the surveillance, I prepared the house. She thought I would be at work, but I planned to be exactly where I needed to be, watching, waiting. That evening she came home, kissed me on the cheek, and complained about how tired she was from work. I had to hold myself back from recoiling. The nerve. She had no idea that I had already seen the photos of her with Mason. She didn't realize that I now understood what her tired really meant. She was completely unaware that I was already laying the groundwork to tear her illusions to pieces. And here's the best part. Before going to bed, she casually mentioned that she might have to stay late at work on Friday. Something about an important meeting with the team. She said it while avoiding eye contact. I kept my tone calm. Don't worry. Take your time, I added, playing it cool. I'll find something to keep myself busy. I don't think I've ever smiled as widely in my life. In a few days, she'd be in for a surprise she'd never forget. And this time, it wouldn't be the kind of surprise you laugh off with a lover. Friday was approaching, and she had no idea that I could play this game too. When Friday finally came, it felt both too slow and too fast. The week had been agonizing, pretending I knew nothing, acting like I didn't feel her driving that knife deeper into my back. But Friday wasn't going to be just any day. That morning, the performance began. She played her role with flawless precision, just as I had expected. Rising before dawn, she took a shower and left the house looking as if she were heading to an important business meeting. She wore the dress from our last anniversary. Of course she did, and I couldn't help but notice. What a farce it was. She thanked me with her fake, rehearsed smile. I watched her gather her things, pack her handbag, and glance at her phone repeatedly, clearly expecting a message. Her eyes flicked to the clock a few times. I might be home late today, she said casually, as if she had practiced the line hundreds of times. I kept my calm. Take your time, I replied calmly. As soon as the door closed behind her, I grabbed my phone. Kyle had already texted. She's left. I'll keep you posted. Time dragged on slowly, but I didn't waste a second. I had been preparing for this day for a long time. Cameras were hidden in key spots: kitchen, living room, bedroom. Call it paranoia. But after what I had learned, I wasn't about to miss a single detail. I needed indisputable evidence, not just for myself, but for the moment when her lies would be torn apart. I was tired of being a fool. Around noon, another message from Kyle arrived. They've met. Downtown hotel. It's confirmed. I stared at the words, letting the truth sink in. While she claimed she'd be working late, she was probably already in bed at the hotel with Mason. Anger flared up inside me, but I pushed it down. Not yet. I had to stay cool. Kyle sent a few pictures. There they were, casually entering the hotel as if nothing was happening. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder like any regular couple. Two people married to others, brazenly flaunting their affair. I studied the images closely. Her smile, the way she leaned into him. It was as if I no longer existed in her world. The sight of it disgusted me, but I wasn't about to barge in and ruin their little weekend. No, I had a better plan. I waited. I paced back and forth. I rehearsed how our confrontation would go. No shouting, no drama, at least not on my end. I wanted her to get tangled in her own lies, and by the time she realized I knew everything, it would be too late. Hours passed, and around 7 p.m., Kyle texted again. "She's heading home." Everything was ready. I sat in the living room, casually flipping through a magazine as if nothing had happened. The door creaked open, and she walked in, as calm and composed as ever. No rush, no signs of anxiety in her demeanor. And why would there be? She was confident she had everything under control. "Hey," she said, setting her handbag on the table. "Rough day?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She nodded. "Yeah, long day." I smiled and gestured toward the table. "I made dinner." For a split second I saw it, a flicker of guilt in her eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it had come, replaced by her usual light smile. "Wow, you didn't have to go to all that trouble," she said, coming over to give me a brief kiss on the cheek, the same lips that had probably been on Mason just a few hours ago. The thought sickened me, but I swallowed it. We sat down for dinner, and I let her do the talking. When she started talking about her day, describing endless meetings and an unbearable workload, I listened with my usual expression, nodding at the right moments and politely smiling. She clearly believed she had control over the conversation, still holding on to the narrative. But the longer she spoke, the more I felt the tension building inside me, like a spring wound so tightly it was ready to snap. And then, without warning, I dropped the first bomb. "How's Mason?" I asked casually, cutting a piece of food. Her fork froze midair, the calm mask on her face cracking for the first time all evening. "Mason? What are you talking about?" she replied, her voice too sharp, too quick. "You know," I continued, leaning back in my chair using a deliberately light tone, "I thought maybe he was at your meeting today. You two seem to hang out quite a bit." For a moment, her eyes flashed with something, panic perhaps, before she quickly masked it with a nervous laugh. "Oh, him? No, he wasn't there. Just the usual team." Liar. I could feel a wave of hot anger rising inside me, but I kept my voice steady. "Really?" I asked evenly. "Because according to Kyle, my friend, the private investigator, you know him, he's been following you for a few weeks, and he's telling a very different story." Her face went pale in an instant, her wide eyes staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. She was trying to find a way out of a trap she hadn't even realized she'd been in for the past few days. What are you talking about?" she stammered, dropping her fork, which clattered onto the plate. I leaned forward, my voice sharp but calm, like a blade cutting through the air. "I know everything. The messages, the hotel, Mason, the lies." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in months, she was speechless. No sarcastic remarks, no dismissive hand gestures. She was trapped, and she knew it. And I was just getting started. We sat in tense silence, the air thick with the weight of what had just been revealed. She sat frozen, mouth slightly open, as if words might eventually come if she stayed still long enough. But I wasn't going to give her the chance to recover, to find a flimsy excuse. "You're lying," she finally whispered in a trembling voice. Her eyes darted to the door as if she were already planning an escape. "This can't be true. There's no detective. You're just paranoid." A bitter laugh escaped my lips, not loud but deep and dark, the kind that comes when everything feels too absurd to believe. "Paranoid?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You really think I made all this up? You really think you hid everything so well?" I calmly pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled to the photos Kyle had sent me earlier that day. Without a word, I placed the phone on the table between us, screen facing up. Her face twisted in horror as she looked at the images. There she was, hand in hand with Mason, walking into the hotel. In another photo, they were sitting at a bar, too close, clearly engrossed in conversation. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, desperately trying to come up with an explanation. But it didn't matter anymore. The evidence was undeniable. Her trembling fingers grabbed the phone from the table, her eyes glued to the screen as she scrolled through the photos. With each new image, her face grew paler, her breathing more ragged. When she reached the last photo, a close-up of her kissing Mason outside the hotel, the last remnants of her composure crumbled. I can explain everything, she managed to say, her voice thin and panicked. It's not what you think. I swear we didn't do anything, she said. We were just talking, just a conversation. This was what she wanted me to believe. Rage boiled inside me, but I suppressed it. I had to stay calm, let her try to justify herself, let her squirm. Talking? I repeated, my voice cold and distant as I leaned in closer. That's your explanation? Nothing else happened? She nodded, her eyes wide open, her fear unmistakable. She looked like a cornered animal. It was purely emotional. I never wanted things to go this far, she said, as if that somehow made the situation better. Her words felt hollow. Really? I replied, feeling no connection to what she was saying. You were always so busy, she continued, her voice trembling. I needed someone to talk to. Busy? That was her excuse? I almost scoffed. You felt distant? And what? Thought connecting with another man was the solution? Her eyes flared with anger as she snapped back. I didn't sleep with anyone. Her voice was sharp, defensive. I didn't sleep with him. Her sudden burst of emotion took me by surprise, but it didn't throw me off. She was still trying to twist the story so that I'd believe her, hoping I'd accept her reasoning. She was clinging to the idea that if there was no physical betrayal, it somehow didn't count. But I didn't need her confession. I already knew the truth. You're lying, I said, standing up, no longer able to endure this performance. Do you really think I'm that gullible? You've been hiding for 5 months, and now you expect me to believe that it was all innocent conversations? She stood up too, her eyes filling with tears. Tears I knew were just for show. She had used those tears as a weapon before, and this time I wasn't going to let them affect me. Please, you have to believe me, she begged, her voice desperate. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't want it to go this far. It was a mistake. I looked at her, feeling both empty and furious. It was like a surreal nightmare, standing face to face with someone I once trusted, watching her lies crumble before my eyes. She was desperately trying to salvage what little was left, but I wasn't going to give her another chance. Was it a mistake when you mocked me in your messages? My voice cut through the air, cold and sharp. Did you feel guilty when you called me a poor fool? Were you ashamed then? Her face froze as if I had slapped her. She hadn't expected that. She didn't know I had seen everything. Yes, I continued, crossing my arms over my chest. I saw it all, every message. I can't wait to see you again. How you laughed about how naive I was, how easy it was to fool me. Now her tears were flowing freely, but they meant nothing to me anymore. She had used them as a weapon too many times. Not this time, not after everything I had uncovered. I didn't mean any of that, she sobbed, stepping toward me, trying to grab my hand. I was confused. It didn't mean anything. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. Not ever again. Please, I beg you, believe me. Her voice trembled and cracked as she pleaded with me. I pulled my hand from her grip, shaking my head in a mixture of rage and disbelief. Believe you? After all the lies? After everything I uncovered? She collapsed to the floor, her knees hitting the ground as her body shook with sobs. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling with each cry. But I stood there, indifferent, cold. I felt nothing, no pity, no sadness, only the overwhelming weight of her betrayal. Did you really think you could hide this forever? I watched her fall apart before my eyes, her tears flowing uncontrollably down her face. You thought I would never find out, that I would keep playing the fool while you led your double life behind my back. She didn't respond. She only cried softly, her sobs barely audible, muffled by her trembling fingers. At that moment, something inside me shifted, a sharp, cutting clarity. Her excuses, her tears, her pleas, none of it mattered to me anymore. There was no redemption. No explanation could undo what had already been done. I straightened up, my voice calm but unyielding. Get up. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face swollen with a mix of fear and confusion as she wiped her face. What? She whispered, barely audible. I said get up, I repeated, my voice like steel. We're not done yet. The truth I was about to reveal was something she would never be able to escape. Shaking, she struggled to her feet, her face pale, her body looking frail. This was no longer the woman I had known just hours earlier, but I felt nothing. Her tears, her pleas, they had no power over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I would take full control. Sit down, I ordered in an icy tone. She hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for a tissue, but she obeyed, sinking into the chair, trying to wipe her face in a futile attempt to pull herself together. I've already spoken to Mason's wife, I said, staring straight into her eyes. I wanted to see the impact of my words hit her like a blow. Her head snapped up, her eyes widening in horror. What? What are you talking about? You heard me, I said, my voice as sharp as a blade. I spoke to his wife. She knows everything. My words hit her like a physical strike. Her lips trembled. She tried to say something, but nothing came out. A heavy, suffocating silence hung between us as I watched her realize what I had said. This wasn't just a revelation, I continued, leaning forward slightly. I wanted the truth to come out. You and Mason thought you could play your little games in secret, as if your marriages meant nothing. Her breathing faltered, panic rising in her chest, her face drained of color. I called her 2 days ago, I said, my gaze unflinching. Her voice was almost a whisper. What did you tell her? I told her everything, I said, a cruel smile creeping onto my lips. I sent her the photos, the messages, every detail. Her face twisted in horror as she realized the full extent of what I had done. No, 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 she muttered under her breath, shaking her head in disbelief, her fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles turned white. You didn't do it. You couldn't have. I did, I replied calmly, keeping my voice steady and confident. She wasn't exactly thrilled when she found out her husband was meeting you at hotels, I continued. I imagine Mason is getting a similar reaction right now. I watched as her expression shifted to despair, her mind feverishly searching for a way out of the mess she had created. Everything she knew was crumbling right before her eyes. She wasn't just losing me, her entire world was collapsing. You've destroyed me, she whispered, her voice trembling, as if I were the one to blame for the chaos unraveling around us. You've completely ruined my life, she repeated, her words shaking with emotion. The audacity of it almost made me want to laugh. I ruined your life? You have the nerve to say that to me right now? You betrayed 43 years of marriage? This is on you, I said firmly, not giving her a chance to rewrite history. You destroyed your life the moment you decided to betray me. Suddenly, she pushed her chair back sharply, the legs screeching against the floor before the chair toppled over, her eyes wide with panic. I didn't want it to end like this. I never thought it would go this far. Mason and I was confused. I thought you didn't care. I thought you didn't love me the way you used to. There it was, her attempt to turn the situation around, to somehow make it my fault. Irritation bubbled up inside me, threatening to spill over. That's your excuse? You didn't feel loved, so you sought comfort in another man's arms? A married man's arms, no less? Her voice cracked as she shouted back, "I was lonely! I didn't know what else to do! You were so distant, always occupied with everything but me. And Mason, he listened to me. He made me feel needed. Do you even understand what that means?" The room sank into a heavy silence, her words lingering in the air. But all I felt was the cold, brutal truth settling inside me. Nothing she said could fix what had been done. No excuses, no pleas could erase the betrayal. I slowly inhaled, letting the weight of the silence hang before speaking again. "Do you hear yourself?" My voice was quiet, almost calm. "Do you really think I'm going to believe this nonsense about a lack of love? Everyone goes through rough patches. Every relationship does. But what you did, you chose to destroy everything we built for what? For cheap hotel meetings? For a few stolen moments?" Her lips trembled, but she stayed silent, realizing that nothing she could say would justify her actions. "I had doubts too," I continued. "There were times when I felt distant. But do you know what I didn't do? I didn't run into someone else's arms." I leaned in closer, locking eyes with her. "You had a choice. You could have come to me. We could have worked through what you were feeling. But instead, you chose Mason. So don't you dare stand there and say I ruined your life. You made your choice and now you'll have to face the consequences." She stood there, small and broken, tears still streaming down her face, but her excuses had run dry. She knew there was no way out now. No lie, no clever excuse could hide the truth any longer. I pulled out my phone again, tapped it a couple of times, and placed it face up on the table. "You should hear this," I said calmly. I pressed the play button, and the room filled with the sounds of the recording, her voice and Mason's from their last meeting at the hotel. The sound was a bit muffled at first, but soon their voices became clearer. Her soft laughter, his quiet whispers, the way they spoke, completely unaware they were being recorded. Her face turned pale. How did you... Remember the Bluetooth speaker you always carried in your bag?" My voice remained cold and steady. "I borrowed it for a while, the one you didn't even check before running off to your meetings." She looked like she was about to be sick. I could see the panic in her eyes, desperately searching for something that could save her. But there was nothing left to save her. She was caught. "You can deny it if you want." I nodded at the phone, which continued playing the recording of her voice. "This evidence is enough for me. It's over." Her hands were trembling, and she looked at me with a mix of fear and defeat. The tears had dried up. There were no excuses left, only silence. "I'm filing for divorce," I said in a firm but calm tone. "And I think you'd better start packing." She didn't resist. She didn't even try to defend herself. She just stood there, staring at the floor, as her carefully constructed life crumbled beneath her feet. At that moment, a wave of calm washed over me. This chapter was finally coming to an end. She froze in place, digesting my words. Her shoulders slumped, and the once vibrant color in her face had completely drained away. For the first time, she truly looked defeated. No more fake tears, no more desperate lies, nothing. "Pack your things," I repeated, my voice firm but with a finality to it. "Go to Mason if you want. I don't care." Her face twisted at the mention of his name, torn between regret and fear. She was finally beginning to understand just how far she'd gone. This wasn't just about the two of us anymore. It was about her and Mason and the chaos they had created. "I'll leave," she whispered, her voice hollow. She didn't look at me, just turned and walked toward the stairs, moving like she was on autopilot, slowly, mechanically, her body going through the motions, though her mind had already shut down. I watched her as she ascended the stairs, feeling an odd sense of relief that everything was finally out in the open. No more lies, no more doubting if I was paranoid. The truth was out, harsh and undeniable. The betrayal had struck, and now it was time to deal with the consequences. While she packed upstairs, I sat back down at the kitchen table, looking at the half-eaten dinner I'd made. It felt like something from another life. Just an hour ago, I was playing the role of the unsuspecting husband. She had woven a complex web of lies, and I allowed her to do it, patiently waiting for the right moment to tear it all down. Now that everything had collapsed, the house felt suffocating, as if the air had been sucked out, leaving only an eerie silence. Sadness had long since left me. At first, rage and disgust raged within me, like a wildfire consuming everything in its path. But now there was only a cold emptiness where once strong emotions had burned. A part of me had already distanced itself, moving away from the wreckage she had left behind. 10 minutes passed before she finally came downstairs, clutching a small suitcase in her hands. Her face was pale, and her eyes avoided meeting mine. I sensed she wanted to say something, perhaps offer a weak excuse or a desperate plea. Maybe she was clinging to a final shred of hope, trying to hold on to some semblance of dignity. But she remained silent. Perhaps she finally realized there was nothing left to save. "I'll spend the night at a friend's," she mumbled, barely audible. I nodded, indifferent to which friend she would stay with. It no longer mattered. She could stay anywhere, just not here. Not here anymore. She paused at the door, gripping the handle tightly, as if she were about to change her mind and come back. For a moment, I thought she might speak, offer one last apology. But she didn't say a word. She just stood there, frozen, unable to move. Then, without a sound, she opened the door and walked out. The soft click of the door closing behind her echoed through the house, louder than any other sound that night. I remained sitting, staring at that door for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the flood of emotions to crash over me. But it never came. There was no breakdown, no overwhelming surge of feelings, just a strange, ominous silence. It felt unreal, as though I wasn't living in my own story. The woman with whom I had shared years of my life was gone, and instead of feeling broken, all I felt was closure. I sat there motionless, for what seemed like hours. The events of the evening replayed in my mind over and over again. Her lies, the confrontation, the fear in her eyes when she realized how much I knew. I had expected some sort of release, a moment of emotional catharsis, but it never came. My thoughts drifted to Mason, to his wife, to the wreckage we were all approaching. This wasn't over yet, not even close. But at least tonight, the storm had quieted. Around midnight, my phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen, thinking it might be a message from Kyle with the latest news. But it wasn't him. It was Mason's wife. Ever since I had told her everything, we had stayed in touch, each of us coping in our own way, silently and thoughtfully. The message was brief. "He's gone too." Only guilt remained. I stared at her words, imagining Mason walking down the same path of shame that my wife had, leaving his home. I didn't feel any pity for him. On the contrary, I was overcome by a dark sense of satisfaction. There was something almost poetic about it. He and my wife had built their own secret world, and now, like ours, their world was crumbling. And yet, as I read that message, I felt uneasy. The affair had been exposed, the confrontations had happened, but somehow it didn't feel finished. Something remained unresolved. The memories of her leaving weren't the only things lingering in my mind. Everything that followed robbed me of sleep. The divorce was inevitable, of course, but how do you gather the pieces of a life that's turned to ashes? Where do you start when the foundation of your world has collapsed beneath you? I leaned back in my chair, my gaze fixed on the ceiling, while endless conversations, shared moments, and promises shattered in an instant swirled in my head. And of course, there was Mason. I couldn't help but wonder if he was sitting in his own ruins, trying to make sense of how everything could have fallen apart so catastrophically. It was clear that neither of them had expected this outcome. My wife had always been so sure of herself, convinced that her double life would remain a secret forever. She probably thought she could easily balance between two worlds, never tripping up or facing the consequences. But secrets, well, they have a way of surfacing, don't they? Once they come to light, there's no way to shove them back into the shadows. Finally, I stood up, stretched, and walked to the window. Outside, it was quiet, absolutely still. It felt as if the world had moved on, leaving me behind. Maybe it had. Perhaps that was the next step, moving forward. The house, now engulfed in eerie silence, echoed with its emptiness. No more of her footsteps, no clinking dishes in the kitchen, not even the muted sound of her favorite podcast that she played while pretending to work. Just silence. It felt like her departure had sucked the life out of the house, leaving only an empty shell. But instead of the sadness or loneliness I expected, there was something else. A sense of relief. As if I could finally breathe deeply after a long, painful period of holding my breath. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I kept replaying our confrontation over and over, her feeble excuses, the look on her face when I told her Mason's wife knew everything. I imagined Mason facing the same collapse, watching his life crumble under the weight of his own deceit. For a moment I wondered if he regretted it. Did she? But then it hit me. Regret wouldn't change anything. Not for me, and certainly not for them. By morning, my decision had become crystal clear. This was no longer just about the end of a marriage. It was about reclaiming control of my life, rebuilding what she had tried to destroy. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me or drag me into the same pit of lies and misery that she lived in. If anything, this was my chance to start fresh, and I was determined to get it right. As the day broke, I called my lawyer. We had already discussed the situation to get the process started, but now I wanted to speed things up. I had no desire to drag it out, no intention of giving her another chance to twist things in her favor. The conversation with my lawyer was brief and to the point. He assured me we had everything needed for a quick and straightforward divorce. After the chaos she had caused, she had nothing left to fight for. Next on my list was Mason's wife. I felt I owed her more than just a phone call. We were both thrown into this nightmare without warning, and though we each dealt with the fallout in our own ways, we shared a common experience, at least for a time. I didn't need anything from her, but it felt right to close that chapter. So, I called her that same day, trying to keep my voice calm but direct. She picked up on the second ring, her voice steady, almost too steady, as if the shock had passed, and now she was just dealing with the aftermath. "How are you holding up?" I asked, not really knowing how else to begin the conversation. There was a pause on the other end. "All right, I guess," she replied after a moment. "As all right as you can be after finding out your husband has been cheating on you for 5 months. Her voice was laced with bitterness, but there was something else there. Acceptance. It seemed like she had already come to terms with it, already decided how she was going to move forward. Perhaps that's how it was, I thought. In some ways, she always seemed stronger than me. "I understand that this is hard to accept," I said softly, finally breaking the silence that had fallen between us. "I just wanted to know how you're holding up." Her response was dripping with sarcasm. "How I'm holding up? You mean how am I dealing with the fact that we're both married to liars?" She let out a hollow, joyless laugh. "Yeah, we're doing just great." There was a brief pause before her tone softened. "Thanks for telling me. I understand it wasn't easy for you." "No, it wasn't easy," I admitted quietly. "But you needed to know. Better you hear it from me than find out some other way later." She sighed heavily. "Yeah, you're probably right. I've already kicked him out. He claims he's staying with a friend, but honestly, I don't care where he goes as long as he's not here." I nodded, though she couldn't see it. "I understand. I told her to leave too." Again, silence hung between us as we both tried to process the strangeness of our situation. Two strangers united by the shared betrayal of our partners. Suddenly, the absurdity of it all struck me. "I wonder how long they thought they could keep this hidden," she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. How long did they believe we wouldn't figure it out? Did they really think we were blind or stupid? I smirked grimly. Oh, I'm sure they thought they had us completely fooled. They probably believed they could drag it out forever. Well, they were wrong, she said firmly, her voice filled with new resolve. Both of them were wrong. There wasn't much left to say after that. The conversation was coming to an end. But before we ended the call, she asked a question I hadn't considered. So what now? What are you going to do now that everything's out in the open? It was a simple question, but I wasn't prepared to answer it. I had been so focused on uncovering the truth and facing it that I hadn't thought about what came next. For me. Now that the dust had settled and the path was clear, what would I do? I don't know, I admitted, leaning back in my chair. Maybe I'll start fresh, take some time to finally focus on myself. She chuckled softly. Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. I think I'll do the same. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, staring out the window. Life outside continued to move forward, but I felt stuck, like I was frozen, trying to catch my breath. But I knew I couldn't stay in this state forever. I couldn't keep replaying the lies in my head or reliving the betrayal over and over again. I had to let it go for my own sake. That evening, I began to clean out the house. Her things were still scattered around. Clothes, shoes, small items she hadn't taken with her. I packed everything into bags and boxes, not caring where they would end up. I just needed them gone. I needed to reclaim this space, to make it mine again. With every item I threw into the bag, it felt like I was shedding another layer of the past, letting go of another piece of her that no longer had a place in my life. When I finished, the house felt emptier, but also lighter. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking around at the space that had once belonged to both of us, but was now mine alone. It was a strange feeling, but somehow it felt right. The divorce was almost finalized on the legal side, and soon everything would become official. But I understood that emotionally, this process was far from over. Healing would take time, and I was okay with that. I had no reason to rush. For the first time in a long while, I was about to move at my own pace. I didn't know where life would take me in the coming months or even a year from now. But one thing I knew for sure. I was no longer the naive fool she laughed at in her messages, the one who couldn't see the obvious. I had regained control, and now I was ready to rebuild my life on my own terms. Standing there, alone but not broken, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Each day, the numbness that had taken hold of me after everything that happened began to fade. The house had become much quieter. At first, the silence felt overwhelming, almost suffocating. But as I started to reclaim my space, the quiet became more bearable. In the first few days, I spent my time in a half-daze, doing meaningless tasks that felt pointless but kept me from being idle. Laundry, washing dishes, sorting through her old things. It was like slowly clearing a blank slate. It felt right. There was something almost therapeutic about it. Yet even as I moved forward, the weight of what had happened stayed with me. The memory of her, with him, haunted me more than I wanted to admit. Not because I missed her, not at all. It was the questions that tormented me. How could the woman I trusted for so many years become a stranger to me before my very eyes? How had I missed all the signs? These thoughts followed me everywhere, surfacing in quiet moments, whispering when I was alone. The betrayal was far more painful than I had initially realized, and no amount of cleaning or packing away her things could erase the marks it left behind. But I was determined. I wouldn't let her define who I would become. I made a decision. I began to focus on myself. At first, it was the small things. I started running again, going to the gym more often, cooking real meals instead of ordering takeout every night. The more I invested in myself, the more I felt like I was coming back to life. This new freedom was something I wasn't used to. There was no one to consult with, no one to tiptoe around anymore. Just me and my own thoughts, which grew clearer each day. I began to think about the things I had put off for years, dreams, hobbies, plans I had shelved for the sake of us. Now, for the first time in a long while, there was no more us. There was only me, and honestly, it felt liberating. A few weeks after she left, I could finally breathe again. The divorce papers had been filed and the process was underway. There were no fights, no drawn-out battles. She didn't even try to contest it. I think she understood that it was pointless. It was over, and she had no chance. As for Mason, he was dealing with his own problems. From what I'd heard from mutual friends, his life had completely fallen apart. Karma has a funny way of catching up with people. One evening, I was sitting in the backyard, watching the sunset as the sky shifted from warm orange hues to soft pinks. It was one of those peaceful moments when the world seems to pause. I held a beer in my hand, just enjoying the quiet. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about her. I wasn't replaying the betrayal over and over in my head. I was just present in the moment. Then my phone vibrated, breaking the silence. I glanced at the screen. It was Kyle, the private investigator who had been with me through the hardest moments. We hadn't kept in touch much after everything happened, though he would check in on me from time to time. But this time, his message was short and cryptic. "You won't believe what I found out today. Call me when you have a minute." The message caught my attention, instantly sparking a wave of curiosity. What now? I thought this nightmare was finally behind me. The affair had been uncovered, the marriage beyond repair, and the divorce process was already well underway. What else could possibly remain unresolved? Yet curiosity got the better of me, and I dialed his number, expecting a brief update. Perhaps the latest news on Mason or my soon-to-be ex-wife. "Hello?" Kyle's voice came through after just a couple of rings, calm, but with a hint of tension. "Glad you called me back." "You've piqued my interest," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "What's this about?" There was a pause on his end, as if he was carefully choosing his words. "I did some additional digging, went beyond what you asked. When you filed for divorce, I thought that was the end of it, but something kept bothering me." A subtle feeling of dread began to creep in. "What do you mean?" "I kept an eye on Mason after everything came out, just to make sure there wasn't anything else happening behind the scenes. And I found something." He paused, letting the tension linger in the air. Mason wasn't the first. A cold wave washed over me. "What are you trying to say?" "She had other affairs. Mason wasn't the first, and he wasn't the only one. She's been cheating far longer than you might have suspected. Mason was just the last in a long line." Nausea swept over me. "How do you know this?" "I have evidence. Letters, messages. This has been going on for 3 years. A crushing weight of sickness bore down on me. Just when I thought I had uncovered the worst, another betrayal surfaced, one she had managed to keep hidden all this time. "How long?" I managed to ask in a barely audible voice. "How many lies has she told me?" "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure," Kyle continued, his voice calm but firm. "But now I have everything." I sat in stunned silence, absorbing his words. It felt like another betrayal, but this time the pain was different. Not as sharp, more like a dull ache that I seemed to have subconsciously prepared myself for. "Send me what you have," I finally replied, my voice hollow. "I need to see it." Kyle agreed, and soon my phone buzzed with new emails and screenshots, but I didn't open them right away. I just stared at the screen, feeling a mixture of emotions. Anger, yes, but also a strange sense of relief. Anger at how deep the betrayal had run, but relief that I now knew for sure that there was nothing left to save. I didn't need her explanations anymore. I didn't need closure from her anymore. I was free. Later that evening, I deleted everything. Every message, every file Kyle had sent. I realized I no longer needed to cling to the remnants of that chapter of my life. I had all the answers I needed, but more importantly, I had finally found the closure I had been searching for. As I sat there, Watching the last rays of daylight fade from the sky, something new stirred within me. It wasn't just hope. It was something deeper, perhaps even excitement about what lay ahead. I had survived the storm, made it through, and now I was ready to start over. It was time to live for myself. This chapter was closed for good, and for the first time in a long while, I looked forward to what the future would bring. A year later, my ex-wife Anna suffered a stroke. After she lost her job, she barely managed to make ends meet. Our 2 children, having learned of her actions, cut off all contact with her. From what I've heard, Anna is in a severe condition and can't even take care of herself. The only people helping her are volunteers who are assisting her to survive. Just a year ago, she couldn't have imagined that her life would fall apart like this. She destroyed it herself, and now she bears the responsibility for it. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.